Are Americans paying attention as the Trump trial rushes toward a verdict? With a former president on trial and a ton of scandalous details, it had all the makings of an unprecedented blockbuster trial held only in America. It's actually difficult to imagine a more dramatic courtroom drama, one that is specifically designed for the media, than one in which Donald Trump, who was once the most powerful person in the world and is currently contending for that title, is compelled to endure accusations of having an embarrassing sexual experience with a porn actress. A political and judicial drama in which the protagonist, a guy not exactly known for his humility, has had to listen, frequently with his eyes closed, while references to him as a Cheeto-dusted cartoon villain and descriptions of him in satin pajamas have found their way into the court file. The American people seems oddly aloof in spite of the weeks of testimony, the millions of pages of records, and the ranks of live TV cameras gathered outside to capture the historic spectacle of the first criminal trial of a former US leader. Just 16% of participants in a recent YouGov Yahoo News poll stated they had been following the trial very closely, while only 33% of respondents said they were just mildly interested in the proceedings. Rather of being intrigued, more Americans claimed to be bored or angry after the trial. Similar findings have been reported in other surveys conducted during the study to assess the level of attention being paid. As the jury's decision draws near, there's a growing sentiment among pundits and pollsters that, contrary to their initial expectations, a national moment may be taking place in Lower Manhattan's criminal courtroom number 1530. Either way, it seems like the outcome could be less of a fulmination and more of a fizzle. Stormy Daniels, whose actual name is Stephanie Clifford, and Trump have consistently denied having sex, and Trump's attorneys have tried to paint Daniels as a fabrication in court. They contended that she made money from her popularity as a result of the charge by selling a variety of goods, including a candle named Stormy, Saint of Indictments. Susan Nicheles, Trump's defense lawyer, stated in one of the most memorable moments of the trial that the porn star had a lot of experience making phony stories about sex appear real. Miss Daniels shot back, "Wow. That hotel room and the sex in those movies are exactly the same," she said, going on to say that she would have written it to be a lot better if the narrative had been made up. She depicted an assumed Mr. Trump opening his hotel room door in his pajamas, taking off his clothes while she went to the restroom, and then an unforeseen, unguarded encounter that, she claimed, left her trembling and wanting to get out. On the surface, though, the case was never really about what happened in that hotel room, at the golf resort, or what didn't. Rather, it is said that the crime was done in an attempt to hide the truth. Michael Cohen, Mr. Trump's close friend, attorney and fixer, paid Miss Daniels $130,000 for her quiet just before the 2016 election, according to the prosecution, with the intention of unfairly withholding the information from the electorate. They asserted that the Trump campaign was already in disarray following the publication of the Access Hollywood tape, which featured their candidate bragging that his celebrity allowed him to do anything he wanted to women, including grabbing them by the genitalia, and that the election was quickly approaching. The disclosure of Miss Daniels' narrative would have resulted in further harm. According to the prosecution, the timing explains why the Trump campaign felt compelled to purchase Stormy Daniels' silence. Some people don't think it's all that shocking that the public doesn't seem to care about the case. First of all, Donald Trump is already well known and has a track record of stirring up controversy. His reputation is tarnished by infamy, and opinions about whether or not he has acted improperly are divided along pronounced political lines. Furthermore, a different sexual scandal from a different political era has hammered home the fact that American voters are significantly less prudish than many believe. Currently a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, Bill Golston had a key policy position in Bill Clinton's White House. "I'm sure I'm familiar with sex scandals that have occurred in or around the Oval Office," he responds. He claims there are similarities between the accusations made against then-President Clinton in the late 1990s, when he was accused of lying to conceal a sexual relationship with White House intern Monica Lewinsky. According to Mr. Golston, I was involved in intense discussions on both sides of the political aisle. And people were wondering where the fury had disappeared to. Only 15% of the population said they were carefully following Mr. Clinton's televised impeachment trial, and slightly over a third said they were only watching some of it, according to polls from the time that are strikingly comparable to those from now. The polling around the Trump trial, which hasn't been televised, is tied for second place with that. The United States Senate found Bill Clinton innocent. Therefore, is it possible that Donald Trump is receiving a similar pass from the American people, if not from the U.S. criminal justice system? According to Mr. Golston, some Americans might be watching and thinking, well, he lied about sex, and just how new is that anyway? The acceptance of sins that were once thought to be fatal is one of the lengthy historical arcs here. The sensational nature of the case and the prominence of the sexual claims may be the reason behind US voters' seeming apathy, rather than the fact that they are riveted to every detail. We might also include the commonly held belief that out of the 4 criminal prosecutions that Donald Trump is facing, the Manhattan trial is by far the weakest. It is predicated on a bookkeeping offense, the purported forgery of reimbursements meant for Stormy Daniels' financier, Michael Cohen, as court costs as opposed to hush money disbursements. The basis of the case is the claimed attempt to improperly influence an election, which raises the case from what would normally be a misdemeanor to a felony. Legal opinions on its merits and likelihood of success are sharply split. It's also difficult to avoid the appearance of a political component, which is a risk associated with America's elected prosecutorial system, considering that the individual pursuing the case, Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg, publicly campaigned on his track record of taking on Mr. Trump in the legal system. Even longtime Clinton White House insider Mr. Golston remarks that you'd have to be very obtuse to dispute the suggestion of partisanship. Mr. Trump has been fully taking advantage of this anxiety, claiming he is being persecuted by an authoritarian regime in his daily statements from the courthouse steps. And this, naturally, from a man who persistently asserts that there was electoral fraud and who attempted to have the 2020 election results overturned. If there is a national moment to be found in any of this, it may be the growing realization that the legal system is not likely to halt Donald Trump's political momentum. Of his 4 criminal prosecutions, only the New York hush money case is expected to go to trial before the election on November 5th. Legal objections have been launched by his lawyers regarding the most serious cases against him, which include the January 6th violence at the U.S. Capitol and his retention of sensitive papers. Rather, there is just one case, which is heavily tainted by sexual scandal and rests on a convoluted legal defense that Mr. Trump will undoubtedly attempt to use for his own political gain, win or lose. A conviction will turn him into a martyr in the eyes of his followers. An acquittal will demonstrate that the entire affair was a witch hunt. And while some polls indicate that some Trump fans could be reluctant to vote for a convicted candidate, it begs the question of why any member of his devoted base would ultimately find it unacceptable if he were found guilty on felony accountancy charges. On Thursday, Mr. Trump addressed a rally in the Bronx, a borough of New York where over 80% of the population is Black or Hispanic, in anticipation of the ruling. Despite being one of the most democratic constituencies in the country, the residents who did show up wearing the required MAGA caps showed that they shared their candidate's intense love for breaking the rules. Born and raised in the Bronx Manhattan doorman, Rojar Watson informed me that part of the appeal for many was Mr. Trump's pledge to use his second term to prosecute Joe Biden, utilize the U.S. Justice Department to his whim, and pardon the January 6th rioters. He remarked, "I think that's cleaning house." That is the only way it can be. Yes, absolutely. He said in response to the question of whether he was looking for a strongman leader. TK nodded, wearing a hat with the word Trump printed all over it. She insisted, the justice system is already broken. I would prefer not for him to resemble, say, a tyrant. However, you must occasionally assert yourself. Would she reconsider if she was convicted of a crime? No, she answered. He is being accused of things pertaining to Stormy, which are private matters. Leave his private life alone. The trial's great irony is that Stormy Daniels' story has become part of political and legal history, despite the hush money payment turning out to be anything but. Because of this, a guy with enormous wealth and influence will soon be tried by 12 regular men and women in a dull New York courtroom, and their decision, guilty, innocent, or mistrial, may have unintended repercussions. But will Mr. Trump be humbled by the wheels of justice turning? It doesn't seem likely. Many of his followers do not deny the disruptive danger that he poses to the foundation of the US democratic system. That adds to the allure